Good afternoon, everyone. This is Susan Albertine, Vice President, Office of Engagement, Inclusion, and Success at AAC&U, and I'm very happy to welcome you this late morning or early afternoon, depending on your time zone, to a video kind of talk or video chat about the LEAP Essential Learning Outcomes and the project that WICHE has been involved in, the Interstate Passport Project. Now, we've got, at the moment, looks like 33 sites logged in. I've tested the sound, and people tell me that they can, in fact, hear me through their computers. We will probably have about 60 sites coming in, and we were a little worried about the feedback that happens if we used the phone dial-in or speaking through the computers for anybody other than me. It's often very chaotic to do that. So we're going to try this as a sort of a video chat. I have some slides. I'm going to go relatively quickly through the slides, and you should send me any questions that you have through the chat function. I will, in fact, be able to see the questions, and I'd love to use them. In fact, I'm much happier doing a LEAP 101 session beginning with your questions, but I'm not quite sure how well that's going to work in this venue. So I'll solve it by talking to you a bit and then receiving your questions. You can send them anytime. I'm totally flexible about receiving the questions and doing my best to answer them. So I will begin and just send any thoughts that you have as we go along. When you get done, be happy to have feedback. I'm thinking we'll go for about an hour, but I do have an hour and a half reserved if we were to need that. So let's begin. I want to give you some background on AAC&U. I can see who's here, and some of you really know LEAP inside and out. You've been active for years. Others of you are brand new. So I thought I'll give you some background. I'll go a little deeper into a couple of things, and then I'll stop and I'll invite your questions. And I would invite you, too, to think about what relates to your understanding of the interstate passport concept. So, liberal education and America's promise. That's our signature campaign at AAC&U. And I want to make sure everybody's got the acronyms. The Association of American Colleges and Universities was founded in 1915, so we're almost a century old. We were always welcome to all sectors of higher education, though most of the members of what was then in 1915 the AAC, the Association of American Colleges, were in fact from liberal arts colleges. We've had a distinguished history. Sometime you might go to the AAC&U website and read about the history. Here are a couple of really interesting highlights. In 1969, we published our first statement about race and race relations in the Academy. In 1971, we launched our first project on the status and education of women, which really did wonderful work to launch much of academic women's movement work. In 1976, we stopped formal lobbying of the federal government. So we had been founded in 1915 for liberal arts colleges primarily, and much of the activity of the AAC was to go to the government and to lobby, be an advocacy organization. In 1976, AAC decided to stop that lobbying, which means rather a large share of the budget, to reduce that and to become the voice of liberal learning. In 1995, we became AAC&U, adding universities to reflect our growing membership. In 2002, we started a campaign trying to figure out what liberal learning should be in the 21st century. That initiative was called Greater Expectations, and we spent some years. This was about the time that I first became aware of AAC&U in that period from 95 to 2002, asking people around the country what liberal education ought to be in the 21st century. Out of those many, many conversations that began with AAC&U in the late 90s and went up through the early years of this century, we realized that we had a new campaign for liberal education. We called it Liberal Education and America's Promise. That campaign we launched in 2005, and the idea in it always has been liberal education should be for everyone. And I will say a little more about that now. But the LEAP campaign, as you may have heard of it, is designed to be our centennial campaign. So we launched it in 2005, and it's going up to our centennial in 2015. One of the key publications of the LEAP campaign came out in 2007. It was called College Learning and the New Global Century. You can find that publication on our website, and we have done quite a number of versions of it ever since. So this is a bit of history, background on AAC&U. We are a membership organization. Our members are campuses, and on each campus we have a certain number of lead representatives and associate members who can join. We're the only large national organization fully devoted to undergraduate learning, undergraduate liberal education. We exist totally to serve our membership and in that way to serve our country. And we have always believed, after in this first century, that a liberal education is our best investment in our collective future. Advancing liberal education is what we do. We like big picture thinking. And I know from my own experience formerly as an English professor and then in campus leadership as a vice provost and a dean, that when you're immersed in the work on campus, it's sometimes hard to do the big picture thinking about what you really care about and value in education in a pluralistic democracy. That kind of big picture thinking can be hard to do on a day-to-day basis, but we exist to do it with you. To work with you. And that, I think, is the great pleasure and honor of working at AAC&U. Let me go to the next slide. So we have strategic plans like any other organization, and this is what we put together for our strategic plan for 2008 and 2012. We're now working on another one. There are always these 5 broad goals: the guiding vision for liberal education, inclusive excellence, intentional integrative learning, civic diversity, global engagement, and authentic evidence. We're used to working with all of those goals. Through public advocacy, we certainly do use our voices and our publications to talk about what this kind of education should be for all students. We spend a lot of our time working directly on campuses with you and in projects. We also put a lot of work into educational and systemic research, gathering evidence of student learning, of the impact of a highly effective liberal education. And we have now, in the last 5 years, begun working with large collaboratives. So I guess you could think of it this way. AAC&U started out as a membership organization with individual campuses. As we go into our second century, we're thinking more and more about how we work with large-scale collaboratives on broader initiatives such as the Interstate Passport Project. So those would involve working with campuses that are members and some that may not be members on a project for the good of education for all. So now just a little bit more about the LEAP campaign. And as I say, you can come back to anything I've said later and ask me questions. LEAP was launched, as I've said, in 2005. The idea of LEAP, the liberal education idea of LEAP, is that the traditional practice in the U.S. of providing a liberal education to some students and very narrow training to other students is not the way we want to go. We want one kind of liberal education for everyone. Those of you who think about higher education in world context have probably noticed that many other countries in the world don't have something like a central concept of liberal education. Higher education in much of the world is focused on professional training or on specialization. In this country, all of liberal education was all of college education in the 18th and the 19th century. These are not new ideas. The breadth and depth that you get from the full sweep of exposure to learning in the arts and sciences, together with whatever your specialization was, that's always been a distinctively American or U.S. idea about education. So it's not new, and it is not about political liberalism. It is about breadth and depth of education for people's lives. So the LEAP campaign, one of the things in the advocacy work of the LEAP campaign that we want to do is engage the public with core questions about what really matters in college. We spend a good bit of our time as well connecting employers and educational leaders as they make the case for the importance of breadth and depth of liberal education in the global economy and in our diverse democracy. We've found that people resonate to this idea if we talk about ways in which we can help all students achieve essential learning outcomes, no matter what major they're in, no matter what technical field or career in technical education. So this is our LEAP campaign, as I have described it. We believe that our future vitality as a nation depends on this kind of education because the world is changing so extremely rapidly. Jobs are changing, working conditions, and just the whole set of communication practices with a global economy, if you can't change, your education will not do you much good for long. And so we think that the idea is that this new approach to liberal education, as pluralistic, as democratic, as equitable, should be for everyone, not broad and deep for the few and narrow and shallow for the many. So there's our kind of breadth and depth philosophy. If you're interested, you can see, and in fact, everything I'm telling you here, you'd be able to find on our website. Just some clarifying terminology so that you can see it. We will make these slides available for you later, and I'm also recording this. So you could actually, we'll get a link out to people if you'd like to have it. Summarizing what I've already said, I think the big differences here that you want to pay attention to if you're a newcomer are these. The idea of liberal education in the United States is the big one, and we're saying that for everybody, and there you can read some of the reasons why. That's distinct from what we traditionally think of as the disciplines of the liberal arts, or as some people sometimes say, the disciplines of the arts and sciences. Those big sectors are the liberal arts. They're part of liberal education, but so is engineering, so is nursing, so is business, all of that, the bigger umbrella of learning, liberal education. General education, which we have been very, very committed to for many, many years at AAC&U is the part of the liberal education as a whole, the part of the curriculum that is shared by all students. And it provides the breadth exposure that I was talking about before. So you often think of general education, or gen ed as we say, as the array of learning opportunities that you have across multiple disciplines, often in the arts and sciences, as distinct from your major. And there's a very clear history of the way general education developed in the U.S. through the 20th century. It was often a checklist from the arts and sciences fields. That, of course, is changing now, and that will affect, I think, the way we think about the WICHE Interstate Passport project. When I say gen ed, think breadth as we're talking, and I'm happy to come back and answer questions about any of this later. I said a few things about this before. Why invest in this campaign? We really are concerned about everything that you've read in the newspapers about the need for college-educated workers, and we know that that's a very hot topic right now. It's part of the discourse of the presidential campaign. Everything that we have learned from people who study the workforce and the global economy is that we need higher numbers of college-educated workers, and we need them in the United States, and we especially need them among younger people. Our older generation is pretty well educated on the world scene. If you look comparatively, if you look at people who are young, from their mid-20s up into their 40s, and people who hold associate's degrees, we start to decline compared to other countries in the world. So, and we keep hearing this. We need more people. Our population is changing. We really must bring folks who are the first in their families to come to college, people from diverse communities in our very, very pluralistic country, into higher education so that they'll be able to go out and get good work through their lives. We are equally concerned about engaging and informing citizens, people who want to be leaders and want to live as citizens who vote, who participate in this precious and wonderful democracy. That's part of the driver of the LEAP campaign. It's not just about workforce. It's not just about citizenship. It's not just about what you learn in college. We hope it's all of those together for a person's life, for people's lives. So the hope is that we have educated workers and citizens with higher levels of learning and knowledge, as well as new and different skills and abilities. We've done a number of employer surveys. I know many of you know these surveys. The surveys are on our website. They were done by the Hart Research Group in 2008 and 2009. What you can see, and I'm just going to show you, I think, 2 slides from the employer research, is that the concept of a liberal education, the breadth and depth, is something that employers care about. And we hear this over and over, and I know many of you have heard it too. Several of you may have known or may have participated on LEAP Day, February 29th. We co-hosted a couple of employer panels, one in Wisconsin at University of Wisconsin-Whitewater and the other at the Cal State University Chancellor's Office, and had 2 sets of employers at each of those sites. And, you know, they came up with the same thing. So we're sure this is what employers are thinking. And you can see that what employers expect of employees is changing. They want broader skills. So think the kinds of general education skills. They want those more. They want them broader than in the past. There's more, though. It's not just about content and exposure to fields. Employees are supposed to figure out how to work in teams, how to coordinate their work with other departments, how to work across fields. We hear this all the time. These are skills that employers hope that students will get in college. Furthermore, we hear consistently that employers, and I would say both profit and nonprofit, our 2009 survey actually included nonprofits. Employers say that the challenges workers face within their company, within the organization, are more complex now than they were in the past for the whole host of reasons that you can adduce. And further than that, to succeed, employees need higher levels of learning and knowledge than they did in the past. Again, this is, I see I have an incomplete source on the bottom. It's Heart Research, 2008 and 2009. I'll have to update that next time I do this presentation. Here are the top priorities for student learning in college, according to employers. And this is where we're starting to move a little closer to what you are thinking about through the Passport Project, WICHE. Instead of asking for people to know English, history, biology, calculus, this is what employers are saying they want people to do when they come out into the workforce. And some of these are capacities that you'll learn in majors, and some of them are general education capacities. That is, they're the liberal education outcomes of college, and this is what employers want. And you hear it all the time. You need to know science and technology. You've got to get some concepts, not just facts. You've got to be innovative. You've got to be able to think about making difficult choices, moral, ethical choices, solving complex problems. And I know, because I've spoken with many of you before, and because I always hear this when I go out on the road talking to people on campuses and to employers, these are things that people are puzzling over. How do we get our general education programs and our majors to do a better job of producing these outcomes? I think that's where we are in higher ed right now in the U.S. So we can use the LEAP campaign for you. We can use it collectively through such projects as the WICHE Interstate Passport to come at the greater goals for education and democracy, and to talk about it and to debate what the educational vision is, the kind of liberating and empowering education that we think of as liberal education. And I'm thinking you're probably aware of these choices. On many of your campuses, you're feeling torn between a liberal education on the one hand or a practical education on the other hand that gets somebody immediately into jobs. We hope that the concept of liberal education overall can bring people together around something that's bigger than the first job that students get or the next technical upgrade for a returning adult student, and think in this more capacious way. We are also doing everything that we can to document progress at the national, state, and institutional level on achievement of essential learning outcomes, which I'm going to come to next as part of the LEAP campaign. So I want to get down a little closer to the ground here. The LEAP vision for learning, we hope starts in school, and in many places, and a lot of them in the West. The people who are doing work on the Common Core, we are hearing, are starting to talk to people at the community colleges and the four-year institutions about that important transition. We hope that liberal education is deepened through challenging studies in college, and we know we got a long way to go there because we're not getting everybody there now. We need to be thinking about the outcomes of college, not the courses or course numbers that we put in or the grade output. We really need to think about how people are empowered through education so they can go out and live their lives and work well. That's what we call essential learning outcomes of college. And we're figuring out ways with all of you to enrich student engagement in college so that they care about their learning, they have lots of high-impact experiences, and they emerge from college with the set of outcomes that you saw described a bit earlier. After talking with people all over the country for over a decade, we have a pretty good idea that these are the things that people think the whole college experience should promote. The essential learning outcomes, and you get to them through high-impact practices, which might include undergraduate research, learning communities. We've really got to spend a lot of time assessing whether students achieve outcomes and whether they can apply their learning to complex questions and the things that the problems they're going to encounter in a rapidly changing and challenged world, and that we always are thinking equity. We're always thinking about every single one of our beautiful students, about diversity, compositional access, but the quality of learning and outcomes for all students. So those are the big campaign bullets. Here are the essential learning outcomes themselves, and it's here that we're getting very close to what the WICHE Interstate Passport Project, or I should say the Interstate Passport Project that WICHE is hosting, is trying to get to. We are sure these are consensus outcomes of college learning. And you see the four big areas of knowledge, skills, personal and social responsibility, and integrative and applied learning. The Interstate Passport Project is chosen to concentrate on the second essential learning outcome, the intellectual and practical skills, to see if we can get to some agreement about learning in that area of outcomes, oral and written communication, quantitative literacy, and we understand a lot of people are interested in critical thinking. But when we refer to the essential learning outcomes, or the ELOs, these are the big four, and much is rolled up in them. And I think my next slide lets you see that. So the first is content and context of learning and experience in human cultures and physical natural world. The second is the skill set, intellectual and practical, and again, we're thinking about application and learning, engaged learning in all of these areas. It's utterly essential to pull in all of our learners today and get them excited so that they're going to stick with it and finish up their degrees. So there's the practical skill set, and you can do a nice, easy crosswalk between the skills in this intellectual and practical skill set and what employers want. And I think that's important, but not the only thing. It's also what we need for good transfer agreements. Personal and social responsibility, the third essential learning outcome, you can see in a little more detail, kind of drilling down into what that means. And that frequently does address some of the questions and goals of citizenship in a complex, pluralistic democracy, and addresses the fact that populations are changing and that we need to understand ourselves, the way we work together, and the way our country is positioned globally. That kind of knowledge and citizenship is essential. Though we are not talking specifically about that in the Interstate Passport Project, you could think about integrating some of those goals into the way we think about skill development, because surely if you think of teamwork and problem solving within the realm of oral communication, you might want to think about intercultural knowledge and competence so you could do it. So I'm beginning to push toward a kind of integrative way of seeing the essential learning outcomes. And that is, in fact, what we learned from everybody in the field is the fourth big outcome, that people need to be able to synthesize. They need to show they can do things at an advanced level across general and specialized studies, and that's integrative and applied learning. This is going to end up being really important when you talk about learning outcomes within the skill area defined for and by the project of the Interstate Passport. And I have a feeling that people are going to have some questions about that. and we'll be leaving time for you to ask questions. As I've moved through all of the features and history of the LEAP campaign, I've said several times, we understand that students are going to learn better if they're highly engaged and if they get involved in high-impact practices. So you want to achieve those essential learning outcomes through a college career. How do you do it? Well, everybody learns better if they're engaged, and everything we've learned from brain science, neuroscience in the last quarter century shows that. There's lots and lots of good science behind it. What are organized classroom practices that will help students learn? And there you see them. There's a good bit of research behind this. I'm not going to go into all of it, but what we can say with great confidence is that if students have chances to get into these practices early on in the lower division, in the middle of their college career, and late, if they're able to go from high-impact experience to high-impact experience, they learn better. They learn better overall. Everybody does better. And the really most wonderful thing about it is that students from the new majority students who are first generation, who are low income, who come from racial ethnic minority groups in the country, you give them chances to go into high-impact practices and study what happens, and we're seeing again and again their progress is accelerated. Their progress is accelerated to the point that sometimes they will outperform students who are more privileged when they have these practices. It's as if you inspire people, you unleash creativity, and I think it's a really, really wonderful thing. I know it gets more complicated to figure out how you get your whole liberal education to have all these practices, and I think that's part of what we're thinking about here. And how do you make sure transfer students have them? And how do you make it all progressive, given the way students are swirling around these days? That's a big challenge, and I think that's one of the things that the LEAP campaign is dealing with, grappling with. We know you are, and we know that people involved in the Interstate Passport Project are thinking about too. Okay, I'm nearly done with my introduction, but I want to make sure to point to assessment, and I mean assessment in a way that contributes to learning as part of the whole picture. How do you know you've achieved learning outcomes? Well, the students have to be able to demonstrate it. They need to show that they've achieved the outcomes. We worked with several of you, actually, I can see on the list, to create rubrics to use for assessment of student learning and student performance of the LEAP Essential Learning Outcomes. Those are called the value rubrics. You can take them for free. They're on the web. They actually have gone viral. You can see the URL. When we talk about assessment at AAC&U, we're thinking of assessment of learning outcomes that's so deeply embedded in the learning that you can't even separate it. And some people would say assessment ought to be a high-impact practice. It ought to be something that faculty care about, that students understand and care about, that's absolutely central to the learning. And you can, many of you I know are using the value rubrics. The reason I wanted to emphasize it here for newcomers is that we're talking about a way of showing that students have achieved learning that's not the same as the results on a high-stakes standardized test. It's not the same as a grade. It's not the same as a transcript with a lot of course numbers on it. We're talking about genuine assessment of learning. And how do we make that part of the transfer process? It's a huge question, and it's something that we hope you will be, energized and stimulated to explore through this project. These are basic principles of excellence. If you explore LEAP, you'll find pretty much everything that I have said will emerge in these principles of excellence. And they keep us on track through the LEAP campaign. But I think if you skim it, you'll see these are the kinds of things that it all adds up to be. And so there's a new way of thinking about an education, a college education, and it's organized this way. These are the best principles that we can think of. And I think I did a fair job earlier, kind of winding back to the three major strands of work of the LEAP campaign. And this is what we've achieved, which is pretty exciting. And this relates to what you're doing with the Interstate Passport. more than 350 campuses have signed up for the Campus Action Network. We have 8 states that have collectively decided they wanted to LEAP. We've got way more than 2,000 institutions using the value rubrics for assessment. And we've got a National Leadership Council that's helping to keep us on track. That's where we are. We've got some years to go, but we think LEAP will probably go on beyond 2015. Here's where we're headed. We've been working very hard on the civic case for liberal education. We are doing all that we can to reframe the conversation about student success as we imagine and work with liberal education for everyone. And we've got more and more states thinking that they might like to do large-scale kinds of collaboration for student success. And then finally, to come back to assessment, we're doing all that we can with people, with you, people in the field, to figure out how we move beyond grades and credit hours to understand student learning and to understand student learning in the context of transfer. We've got a lot of publications. Many of you know these. You can order them from our website. They're quite inexpensive, and if you're a member institution, you get a big discount. So if you're curious about what I have been saying or want to dig in a little deeper, you can do that by going to our website and looking at publications. This is what we're all about, and I want to get to the point where I can attempt to field some questions from you or take some comments from you. The beautiful students, and actually these are students from one of the campuses in the Passport Project. So, and that's my inspiration, the reason I'm doing this, because their learning is our future. And what happens to them will depend so deeply on our success right now and bringing them into an education that will give them thriving lives. And that's all the contact information. If you want to explore the Campus Action Network for individual campuses, or if you'd like to play around in an interactive Web 2.0 toolkit, you can go there. Or if you've got a question that you'd like to send to me. Okay, it is a little strange just talking this through without hearing your voices back or without seeing your faces, but I have done my introduction, and I now have some time for you to put in questions. Somebody said they lost sound, and I need to ask you to log back in. If other people have lost sound, do let me know, but I don't think that everybody has lost sound. Let me just make sure. Somebody write to me and say you're still there, you're still able to hear me. Okay, some people are still able to hear. So I'm going to hope that the person who lost the sound would go out. Oh, and other people are saying, yeah, I hear you. Okay, you're there. I guess I would love to hear questions that come from people who are new to LEAP. I know that some of you could have done this presentation probably better than I did. So, but for people who are new, are there questions that you would like to ask before we go into anything that might be a little more complex about the project? Because I'm happy to look at both. All right, somebody says, what is the function of essential learning outcomes? Does that mean that all campuses should adopt essential learning outcomes as their institutional learning outcomes? Or does it allow the campus some differences and some freedom? That's a great question. Thank you for asking it. We understand those outcomes to be rather broad and general. And you can reach through many, many different pathways. You can figure out a way to reframe those outcomes for your own campus context or for your own system. I'll give you an example. Wisconsin is, though not in the Witchy region, is a LEAP state. And Wisconsin decided to take the essential learning outcomes and convene a group of faculty to rewrite them and reframe them in a way that they thought would make sense for their system. And they added sustainability. They really wanted to emphasize sustainability as a theme. So they called them the shared learning goals, and each campus has the chance, or really is welcome to revise the learning goals as they see fit. So if you think of it as a larger framework, and you think of ways in which you can contextualize the work, you absolutely do have freedom on your campus. These are not a matter of legislation. We're trying to reflect the big themes that people care about. And I am going to take a second here because somebody is still without sound, and I got to write down, try logging in again. Okay, so I'm going to send that, and then I will come back to everyone here. Other questions. I took a stab at that, and you know, it would be totally fine with me if somebody else feels like quick writing in something to add to what I said. The ELOs are a broad framework of outcomes. You can think of them as a destination that you can reach through a very large number of pathways, and you can own and reframe for your own context. Any other questions about the essential learning outcomes? I know many of the campuses in the West have actually taken them and reframed them, are using them in their own way. Happy to have any other questions from others, and maybe a more advanced question if you would like to try that. Okay, I've got another one. Given inclusive excellence would necessarily involve disadvantaged student groups, and many of our students are full-time workers, we have to compete with their work and life. How can we do the high-impact practices? That's a great question. I would say that campuses, broad access campuses, have really been grappling with that. I hear about it all the time. I could give you one or two examples, and then I could urge you to get involved with AAC&U so you can meet some people who are addressing some of those issues. I'll give a story. I'll tell a very quick story. It's actually a California story. It comes from a community college in California. How to start embedding high-impact practices when you're working with students who are working. They have to be connected through the classroom work, and you can use them in a hybrid or distributed way. Now, the particular example I want to give is a course, it's actually a technical course in radio and television at a California community college. The professor in that course decided that he wanted high-impact practices, and he figured out that he could actually embed a high-impact practice in his curriculum, and students could work on it on their own time, whether they take the course during the day or whether they take it during the evening, or potentially whether they do it online. He came up with the idea of a public service announcement as something that you would do in the radio and TV course, and instead of telling the students what they should work on for a public service announcement, he challenged the class to figure out for themselves what they cared deeply about. And they came up with incredible ideas. He was so excited about the first project, which was about smoking on campus. The students were trying to figure out how to rework the policies so they actually did work and you didn't walk out of the buildings into a cloud of smoke. They got into that. They did PSAs all over the place, lots of different venues, lots of different platforms. They were working in teams. They were doing community service. He was so energized that now he puts that into his curriculum every single time. And this year, students have decided that the topic is access because, many of you are from California. Access to community colleges is a really big deal right now. Some people don't have it because of the budget. So the students are incredibly excited about that topic, and they're doing these highly motivated, engaging PSAs. I'll have to let that stand as an example, but if you like, you can explore the LEAP Campus Toolkit and find some other examples. And here I need to say, Max, you're helping me out. The person, Seth G., is unable to get logged in. If you can help me out with that, it would be really good. I'm going to try writing to him again. Max, why don't you send me your phone number and maybe I can have him phone you. Pardon that aside. I guess it goes with the territory. Somebody wrote back to address the earlier question about whether the essential learning outcomes are kind of standardized set. Here's one that an answer to that question that came in from the CSUs, from one of the CSU campuses. The Cal State University system overall has adopted the essential learning outcomes, but each campus in the system has been invited to shape them individually. And that's a really good example. So if the question came from somebody in California, you might want to think about talking to somebody at CSU if you're perhaps on a community college campus. Okay, any other questions? I'll wait a second and see if others come in. Someone did send me a question in advance. Okay, technical question. Let me go and do this question. PowerPoint slides and video recording will be available. Yes, it's true. They'll be available, and the link will be sent to participants. Yes, all of this will be available. I'm recording it. The slides are available, so we'll make sure that you get that. Okay, let me go to the question that somebody asked me in advance. If we're thinking about transfer, of demonstration of essential learning outcomes in the areas of the curriculum defined by the Interstate Passport Project, that is written and oral communication and quantitative reasoning, are we thinking about courses strictly, or are we thinking beyond courses? And I know that this is an issue. Let me see if I can take a stab at it, and I'd be happy to have some comments from you. We're very used to working with course credits, and GPAs is the kind of currency for transfer. And it's very difficult for us to liberate our practice or liberate our minds from that kind of thinking. And you know that's what transfer protocol is all about. But just imagine that if a student had been in say, an associate's degree program that had writing across the curriculum, and he or she may have had 2 or 3 courses that are writing intensive. You might be able to say, we could certify that that person has achieved the desired level of performance in writing because we know that curriculum and we trust it. We don't have to write down all those course numbers, though we may wish to do that. We could also put some kind of warrant or some kind of badge on the transcript that says, from this institution, we are certain that the student is able to write and perform in writing at the level that we have agreed upon as essential at the 2-year degree level. And it need not be a crosswalk precisely from a course to a course number. It could potentially be to defined performance. It could potentially be rooted in some documents presented in an electronic portfolio. So when we think about achievement of essential learning outcomes, I hope that you will start to think beyond the course number and start to think about assessment of genuine work, engaged work that the students are doing, and that we can collectively begin to think beyond the metrics and the practices that we have used for the past century. That seems to me exceedingly important. Okay. I would be very happy to answer any other questions. I haven't got evidence that the person who couldn't hear is able to hear at this point. Some of you I see are still out there. It looks like we've got about 33 people on. Any burning questions, anything that you think is still murky or muddy, I would be very happy to address it. We have a little bit of time left, or any observations that you want to make, and that would be okay with me. It is a peculiar experience being the one with the voice, and it's a little bit humbling to be here. But I do hope that I've answered some of your questions. And I'm not seeing any. Oh, here's one. Okay. Someone is saying the key here, and this is, I think, particular to the interstate passport, the key is that you got to state both things, that we're looking for competencies, demonstration of essential learning outcomes, while acknowledging that current practice is very powerful. That is, that courses and credits are all we have known. And I would say you're absolutely right. We're trying to do 2 things. We're working with a 20th century system that came out of the industrial era, and we are in a different world, folks. We're talking about competencies and outcomes and demonstration. Grades just don't quite get us there, and neither do courses. And our jobs don't get us there either. The other thing is, eventually, and this is the person who just wrote in said, if you're thinking about this new kind of economy, if I can be permitted to say that, it assumes we're bringing together faculty across 5 states. You know, ideally we would, but maybe we can get there if we invite 2-year and 4-year partners in the states individually to start having these conversations and figure out what would work with them, and then assemble people to cross state lines to have the conversations. I have to say that in the Wichita region, there are many, many engaged faculty who understand all that I've been talking about and who are ready to jump in and pilot some of this work. So it's exploratory, it's pilot work, and I do think it's exceedingly important. Okay, and it looks like I have one other comment. It says, we've adopted a number of the LEAP Essential Learning Outcomes, but we haven't drafted rubrics yet. Have institutions found the rubrics clear and simple to use? Assessment is an issue that stymies my faculty colleagues quite a bit. The short answer is yes. People are using the value rubrics, and they find them quite easy to use. Around the world, I'm always astonished about the way Australia has taken the value rubrics and run with them. I think the number I gave you was over 2,000 institutions are using the value rubrics. Here's something to remember. Just as it's true that we're inviting people, because you own this stuff, we're inviting campuses to own the essential learning outcomes and to modify them and make them their own. Same thing's true of those value rubrics. We have the teams that wrote the value rubrics involve people from over 100 institutions all over the country. And what most often happens now is that people download the value rubric, take it back to their campus, give it to a group of people and ask them, does this look like it works? And if it doesn't, they modify it. And we know that's happening all over the place. It should. This is about ownership of the curriculum and the assessment by the field. Okay. So I hope that addresses it. One other question came in. All campuses, this is smart, good question. All campuses have a good course management database system, but not an outcome database system. Oh, any plan to endorse or recommend such a system? We're trying to decide on an assessment management system for our campus, but it's time-consuming to investigate which of the systems are best. The Interstate passport system would demand such a system similar across campuses and states. AAC&U might be able to help with a question mark. Well, there are ways that you can get systems to talk to each other. I don't have time to go into details about that, and my knowledge of it is at the sort of system design level, not down in the weeds or the code. But in fact, all of the major course management systems and assessment systems have presented the value rubrics as examples of ways in which they can capture outcomes. So I do think that there are modifications of major systems like Banner that you could make, and we could have a crosswalk to other systems. I'm hearing you that you want us to do more of that work. I can say that we have been very involved in the development of e-portfolios, electronic portfolios that use a wide array of platforms, and there's a very, very active group with an acronym, AAEEBL. You can say ABLE. And it's all about experiential and learning and e-portfolios. I would urge you to go look up AAEEBL, and you'll be in a world that will answer some of those questions. And yes, we do intend to keep involved in the system part of it insofar as we're thinking about demonstration of learning outcomes. Okay, we are about at the top of the hour, and so I will be signing off unless anybody else has questions. This was interesting. Many of you know me. This is not my usual way of doing presentations, but I kind of enjoyed it. even though I have to imagine your faces or imagine your intonation. So I see some people are thanking me. Well, let me thank you. And as I said before, we'll make sure that we get the recording, the link out to you. And it'll have the audio and it'll have the slides. And if we can figure out how to do this again, we will. Maybe we can do it next time with a fully interactive system. We can give that a try. And I'm always game, and I know that we at AAC&U are game. Thank you so much for your interest in working with WICHE to explore the interstate passport concept. I have to tell you, it's one of the most important areas of work that I can think of. We really have to do this together. No single institution, no single system, no single state can do it. But I do think if we work together, we have the potential to move the field. And with that, I'll bid you good afternoon, and I hope you have a lovely day and a lovely week.